our visitors. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm not a pastor, that's the other Nathan, so bear with me. Here we go. James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3 says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance." That's pretty easy to say when you're not dealing with a trial, isn't it? When a trial does come along, that becomes a different story. Kind of like what we've been dealing now with the new normal and everything. Well, 5 years ago, my family and I were hit with a pretty large trial. I actually wrote a short story about it. Here are some excerpts from that. I called it "The Day My Life Changed Forever." It was written in September 2015. Cancer. Whether your age is 8 or 88, it's a word you're never ready to hear. While everyone knows someone who has had it at some point, when you're the one who has it, as you know, it becomes a whole new life. As you know it, becomes a whole new ballgame. Here's a little recap of how my life has changed in those months. I was possible reasons for the enlarged nodes, one of them being a cancer known as lymphoma. Upon hearing that, I promptly announced that I wasn't feeling too well and passed out. I passed out one other time, the last time I gave blood, and that was the last time I gave blood. But I came to shortly afterwards, and they gave me a chocolate donut to bring my blood sugar back up. He later told me that the next step would be to do a biopsy so that we knew exactly what was going on. April 16th, 2015, time for the biopsy. I was sent to the UPMC hospital in Greenville. That was the home base for the thoracic surgeon who would be doing the procedure. I was told there would be two options. Option A would be to take a sample from my neck if they could find tissue sample from my neck if they could find one big enough to put under the microscope. Option B, the more invasive option, was to get the sample from my chest cavity, which involved spreading ribs apart the night in the hospital. But thankfully, option A was all that was needed. The caregivers at the hospital were wonderful and encouraging. They sent me home that evening with good wishes and told me that my tissue sample will be sent to Pittsburgh for analysis. The results are in: Hodgkin's lymphoma, a very treatable and often curable form of lymphatic cancer. It's similar to leukemia, but not as aggressive. It's also milder than the non-Hodgkin's. You might have heard about that with commercials about Roundup and such. But that's not what I'm here to have, the Hodgkin's. The other symptoms included a sore throat and feeling run down, both of which could be attributed to any number of things. So while the news was extremely unpleasant, I was thankful that the weight loss happened and prompted me to investigate it. After another more thorough scan, they discovered I was in stage 2, an early stage. The course of treatment was to be chemotherapy followed by some targeted radiation. I had the initial meeting with my oncologist here in Newcastle, who had also treated my grandmother many years ago and was familiar with our family. She explained the treatment regimen and told me of possible snags that might come up along the way: hair loss, nausea, and others. She and her staff were very pleasant while still being upfront about the situation. I would need to have a Metaport inserted into my chest for the chemotherapy to be administered, and a bone marrow biopsy just to be sure that the cancer hadn't spread into my bone marrow. The port was installed and the bone marrow biopsy done. No cancer in the bone marrow. It was staying put, yay. And the chemotherapy session started shortly thereafter. The chemo would be given every 2 weeks with blood checks on the off week to be sure my body was rebuilding itself. The first treatment was by far the roughest and longest. They had to monitor me every time a new medicine was given to make sure I didn't have any adverse reactions to anything. Thankfully, I didn't. The week or so following it basically involved a lot of laying around while rubbing my head sort of like this every morning just to see if the hair was still there. A sore throat, nausea, and a metallic taste in my mouth which took the fun out of me. I later learned that was known as chemo mouth and happens to many cancer patients. Going back to the whole hair thing for a moment, when I began treatment, my brother told me if I lost my hair, he would shave his head. Thankfully, he didn't have to. And my dad, on the other hand, he was a little ahead of the game. But anyways, medicines were thankfully able to curb many of the side effects, and things progressed along fairly well. The weeks that followed were full of ups and downs, rough days and weeks and smooth ones. I later met with my doctor, who would be handling the radiation aspect of my treatment, and came to discover that one of his technicians was a girl that I graduated from high school with. They did the preliminary layout of where on my body the radiation would be targeted and told me I would have to report to it for 5 days a week. But each session would last less than an hour and there would be little to no side effects. My life as I knew it was slowly starting to return to normal, just in time to go back to school. Finally, they came for my final treatment. Once it concluded, they told me that there would be another scan and then the radiation would start shortly thereafter. This was my final chemo treatment. Once that was completed, I would have to be monitored periodically just to make sure nothing negative was going on without knowing about it. I was told that the recurrence rate for this type of healing